Behind the Built Environment, the podcast from BESA, the UK's leading trade body for the building engineering services sector.
This is Behind the Built Environment, and I'm David Frise. Today I'm joined by Mussa Awaleh, Team Leader for Self-Certification Schemes and Reform of Building Regulatory Guidance within the Building Safety Regulator's Technical Policy Team. Mussa is helping shape the future of competence, self-certification and building regulation. As expectations around building safety continue to evolve, his work is influencing how installers, contractors and certification schemes demonstrate compliance, improve standards and build public confidence. Today we'll explore why competence has become central to building safety and the role of the self-certification schemes, formerly known as competent person schemes. And we will look at the role they play in raising standards and what the latest regulatory reforms mean for businesses across the building services sector. Mussa, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
There was quite a lot of alliteration in that this time. A bit of a tongue twister.
Yes.
I think you've seen some of these before, so we always kick off with quick-fire questions. And then I'm going to ask you, did you choose the career or did the career choose you? But let's kick off with the quick-fire questions. Yes, no, please.
Right, I'm ready.
Is competence now more important than ever?
Yes.
Can self-certification improve building safety?
Yes.
Do self-certification schemes, as we said, the former competent person schemes, benefit both contractors and consumers?
Yes.
Will regulation continue to raise the bar for the industry?
Yes.
Is compliance becoming a commercial advantage as well as a legal requirement?
Yes.
We should have had a few no's in there this time. Note to the producers. but that, they were very affirmative, which is what we like to see.
Yes.
So, first question, just about yourself. Did you choose the career or did the career choose you?
It's a bit of both. I think that I started off, I always call myself a standards man, David. So I started off working on the National Qualifications Framework and National Occupational Standards at the Construction Industry Council. Prior to that, I was into IT and more into database building, but having left university, my calling probably was working in the sector skills environment or sector skills council environment. So with construction skills, I was primarily focused on developing the qualifications framework for the sector, the professions and the trades. Having been there for a few years, I walked into British Standards Institution and became a standards man there and leading on construction products regulation and regulatory standards there. And then having worked with the department for a number of years, I then applied to work in MHCLG, looking at the post-Grenfell Tower world and from 2019 onwards. And that's where I've been, working on policy related to the Grenfell Tower tragedy and its aftermath, really.
It sounds like there's a bit of a calling in there for you.
I think there is. It's quite tricky. I never knew it at the time, but I think having stepped into the industry and been involved now for probably 15 to 20 years, the network that I've built up and the people that I've worked with over the years have kind of had an impact on me, if you like, and an imprint on me on a personal and a professional level. So I think my journey is a journey that's pretty unique, I guess, but definitely something that I understand to be beneficial because of the network of people that I know and the journey that I've been over the last 15, 20 years in the sector. It's changed dramatically.
I always think that anybody who's been in the industry for any period of time and they weren't affected by Grenfell and the inquiry, what are they doing? And that's the kind of calling that you want a better industry.
Agreed. I mean, some of my friends lived in the tower. So I live in West London and I'm from the Shepherd's Bush area. And some of my friends were living in the tower at the time of the tragedy. So I have that personal connection with the tragedy at one level, but definitely at that level of being involved in the sector and having an appreciation of the challenges within the sector. I saw that as an opportunity to kind of contribute to the evolution of the regime. And that's something that merged the personal with the professional at the time. And I've been on that journey for the last 7 years.
And in that 7 years, do you think the industry gets it, the significance of Grenfell?
I think they do. I think they are very reflective on the most significant regulatory change since the 1984 Act. So there is an appreciation that where we were prior to June 2017 and where we are today are two different spaces. But I think the challenge for us from a government perspective is really on the comms level, David. That taking the industry with us on that journey. And I think it's a long journey. It's not a like on and off scenario. And I think a lot of that is really down to how we engage with the industry. As you know, the industry has a very long tail.
Yes.
And there are hard to reach groups within the industry that we know are hard to reach by definition. So it's really about how we engage with those organizations that do the work.
So it's a combination of leading people, but there's some you leave behind.
Agreed.
Indeed.
And that's inevitable.
Why is competence then such a central issue, particularly for building engineering services? What's the reason?
I think for me, there's an element of a life safety dimension here. So what we're looking at here, especially with electrical safety and combustion safety related competency criteria, you're looking at the types of work that are critical, not only to delivering decarbonisation of homes and the government agenda in that respect, but also about the health and well-being of the occupants within those homes. So in large respect, I deal with the retrofit sector, the domestic retrofit sector. And that for me is where all the tension is in that respect. It's really about having the consumers who are clearly in need of engaging with competent contractors aware of who are those competent contractors carrying out that work across the building engineering services professions and trades. And that dynamic, I think, is written through a number of consultations that are out at present.
What does good look like in a competence scheme?
I think good looks like, from our expectation, good looks like a scheme that effectively has a transparent and robust approach to verifying the competence of their registered businesses. And that effectively should stand up to the light, if you like, of scrutiny that's applied to it by the regulator. The regulator applies some dimension of rules. There are requirements in the building regulations that must be met, but ultimately the duty holder regime places a duty on those operatives operating in the sector. So that dynamic, I think, is still at an early stage, I would say, and we're still evolving as we go through this process. But definitely the element of having a system that is open to scrutiny and challenge is important. By way of an example, there's a real focus now on assessment of registered businesses, of installers. How do you clarify and revalidate and reassess the competence of installers in the sector? So if you go to a large cohort in the sector who have been on the tools for a number of years, that dynamic, I think, is pretty challenging to them. So having a clear and transparent way of doing so, I think, as a scheme operator and as an organisation really helps, I think, translate the message that we want from the centre to be delivered to the periphery.
And what's the role of the self-certification schemes in this process?
It's a really interesting question there. They are central to this. So BESA, as BESA, operates a ventilation and air conditioning competent person scheme. So in that dynamic, the department, MHCLG, sets the criteria in a framework that must be met. Financial probity, operational capability, technical assessor base, and that dynamic between the contractor and the consumer. All of this is supposed to support the building regulatory regime. You're talking about over 130,000 registered businesses operating in 14, 15 installation schemes, carrying out most of what constitutes building work in the sector. So millions of jobs, the replacement of boilers, the replacement of windows, etc., in people's homes in large part. So the schemes are central to the delivery of the building regulatory regime, I feel. And the review of the system recently was really a conversation about how we bring that into the building safety world.
Just as a side bit, what led to the changing name from competent person scheme to self-regulatory scheme?
We received a number of emails, as we do, as the regulator, asking, well, if I'm a competent plumber, Mussa, do I have to be a member of a competent person scheme? You do not. So then we had to have a conversation internally about, well, what are these schemes principally intended to deliver? Their members should be self-certifying the work, shouldn't they? That it meets the requirements of the regulations. And that, I feel, needs to be made clear and front and centre. The scheme operators we engage with agreed with this. This rebrand, I think, is necessary to place it within the building regulatory regime.
That makes sense. We had many conversations about rebranding because it wasn't about the person.
Agreed.
And it always felt like the name didn't support what it was.
No.
And so what's the role of the building safety regulator in this process?
So we monitor their performance Essentially, we engage with the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, who carry out annual audits of those scheme operators against the criteria and the conditions. So in effect, we are the steward of the system and how it currently operates. And I think between the Building Safety Regulator and MHCLG and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, we operate in carrying out that function over all of those schemes. Now, you've got to remember those schemes are also Trustmark registered scheme providers who operate in government-enabled schemes under DESNES, and the same with the Microgeneration Certification Scheme accreditation system. They operate under that system as well, with the Boiler Upgrade Scheme, for example. So we're talking about organizations that operate on a dual or triple function basis. So I think there's some tension there. And through the consultation, we're trying to address that.
And do you see those schemes evolving over time?
Most definitely. There's a conversation taking place about the proportionality of the regime at present, on whether or not the current list of work under Schedule 3, which covers, if you like, their scope and purpose, should be reviewed. I think that conversation has started with the consultation we carried out and will continue going forward. I also think that the work of the Industry Competence Committee, and in particular the Industry Competence Steering Group, will feed into the evolution of this system.
What are the biggest compliance challenges you see for contractors?
I think we, again, go back to the comms piece. Are they aware of their responsibilities in this regard? Are we placing a responsibility on the scheme operators that may not be being delivered at the coalface? This is the challenge, I feel. We engage with the scheme operators on a regular basis, but our relationship with the installer community or the community of installers and contractors isn't the same. And I do feel that we're getting better at this. And I think going forward, that's where the focus is going to be. It's about how we oversee that relationship, how their function evolves in the system, and whether or not there are opportunities for the system to grow. In large part, we've been pretty static in terms of numbers, but my understanding of the Warm Homes Plan and what's coming forward through the Warm Homes Plan necessitates a conversation about workforce capacity and the skills agenda across the building engineering services professions.
Many installers don't realise they have to notify as a controlled service,
Yes.
working on a controlled service. How is that going to change over the years ahead? How are you going to make them aware? Is it through enforcement, or is it marketing?
You can see in a single construction regulator prospectus consultation, there was conversation about what might be described as a profession strategy. In the DESNES consultation about the consumer protection piece and how that will evolve, there's a conversation about the register of professions or retrofit professionals. I think the way forward is going to be about how that dynamic will work in future and how that may function going forward with regards to their responsibilities. And that, I think, is critical here. We saw through the NAO report, the National Audit Office report on the challenges with the Energy Company Obligation Scheme, that dynamic was an issue. And I think going forward, we've got to get better with our comms, but also our expectation of contractors has to be met through another mechanism. So is there a conversation about a register of professions or a register of trades? This is, I think, the direction of travel is going through.
If this is the first time you've learned, you are an installer, and it's the first time you've learned about the self-regulatory schemes, what advice would you give people?
Well, I give them advice to consider how they see themselves going forward operating within such a scheme and determining themselves how they meet the criteria that's been set through the mandatory technical competency frameworks. I also think that it's not just through the self-certification scheme route that they can be deemed to be competent. They've got to think how they could meet that criteria through other means. They could operate under a government-enabled scheme, for example. There could be a merging of these different schemes under one umbrella body. This, I think, is where the direction of travel is. There are opportunities there for sole traders, micros, etc. But I think it's all about educating yourself in that regard.
So the trains leaving the station on evidencing competence and compliance, you need to get on board now.
Agreed. And I think that's where the focus is going to be going forward.
And the government are proposing a single construction regulator. What difference will that make?
I think it's a really interesting conversation that's happening as we speak, David. I think the consultation response was published 2 weeks ago. You may have noted that in that response, there was a conversation about its functions. The building safety regulator is effectively the cornerstone of this new regulator. The steward of this regulator will be the MHCLG, and they will have operational independence around their enforcement and regulatory functions. But will it involve a scenario where the National Construction Products Regulator will come into play? Will it involve a scenario where other functions of the system come under one umbrella body in the SCR? I think that's still being debated as we speak, but there's definitely an indication through that consultation that all these functions could be brought under one organizational entity.
One thing we hear a lot is it doesn't apply to us. Building Safety Act doesn't apply to us at all. Is that something you're still hearing?
I think so. And I have to say that we are being asked the same questions that probably you're being asked. And I think that's an indication of the message maybe not landing. We publish guidance on GovUK. We publish our consultations on the same kind of pages. I think there's a conversation to be had about how we reach out beyond the typical approach and the typical process. I think that's a major challenge.
I think you're right. We divide the industry into threes. There's 1/3 get it straight away. There's 1/3 have no idea why they're having to do stuff, but are compliant, so they do it. And there's 1/3 who go, well, there's a rule for this. There's a regulation for this.
Yep.
And I guess the middle bit's fairly easy to, but it's the rump that have no intention.
Yes.
It's how you deal with them.
Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, obviously we get asked about enforcement, David, and whether or not we will take forward, if you like, action against those bad actors in the system.
Yeah.
I think that conversation is part of how this new regulator will be stood up and how the review will be taken going forward. But definitely the ECO4, if you like, the Energy Company Obligation Scheme experience and the findings from the National Audit Office report pointed towards that as well. It's really about how we promote those organizations who are operating within the parameters of the system and doing so, at a high level, and then taking action against those who are breaching the law. In effect, if you're not meeting the requirements of the regulations, you are breaching the law.
I always feel that in order for enforcement to work, the people who it is aimed at have to be able to picture themselves in that scenario.
Agreed.
So, someone gets fined or even sent to prison, they need to think that could be me.
Yes.
And until there's some empathy there.
Yes.
It doesn't really work.
Yeah, the sort of Damocles scenario I think
Yes.
that people think about.
Yeah,
I think the challenge also there, David, is that we're constantly receiving feedback from homeowners and people who are living in their homes who have had negative experiences in this regard. And I think that challenge is real. Do they go to training standards? Do they go to builder control? Do they go to the individual contractor? The routes for redress here are unclear, and I think that's a big challenge for us going forward.
We kind of touched on this before we came in over a coffee, but there are some consumers who cannot be satisfied and will not be satisfied, and these schemes tend to be over-regulated in order to protect a consumer that cannot be protected. And so there needs to be protections both ways, doesn't there? For the good installer who's done a good job, but, for example, can't get paid. Is it going to work both ways?
I think it's an interesting question here. A lot of what we're seeing by way of correspondence is from those consumers, right? So those who are unfamiliar with the system and are technically frustrated by the experience. I think in that regard, we need to consider what the options are here. So I think the ICC, the Industry Competence Committee, is producing guidance for informed and uninformed clients. And by those uninformed clients, I think it's the domestic client, which is the main focus here. And I wonder if we engage with them, engage with groups like CAB, the Citizens Advice Bureau, and Consumer Scotland, for example. Could that help address the issues that they've identified in the system previously? I think that's how the conversation may be taken going forward. I think perfection is probably being defined as being the enemy of the good in certain respects. You're never going to get 100%. The challenge for us is about how we communicate this message to that audience.
Products and competence are intrinsically linked. You have a product. The client doesn't buy a product shrink wrapped on a pallet. It's incorporated within a system. So how does the construction products reform white paper fit into this picture?
I think it's really interesting that the recategorization of products in this respect to widen the scope of the existing regulatory regime is important. At present, there are 450 harmonized European standards that basically are the focus or the locus of the existing system. I think this could expand to include a vast amount of construction products that are not within the existing system. So that's really an important kind of development going forward for contractors and specifiers who are involved in the selection of products. The general safety requirement will apply to all products used. So in terms of declaration and selection and intended use, I think these duties will be passed on to those duties for the principal designer and principal contractor roles. So essentially it's another level or another layer of regulation that organizations at an organizational level, but at individuals at an individual level need to have an appreciation of, definitely.
So the role of the manufacturer will change, and the day when they could at the factory gate they stopped and then they picked it up as a defect, those days are gone.
I think there's a conversation to be had today as to whether or not manufacturers are principal designers, and we are engaged in those conversations on a fairly regular basis now. So they've come within this system, and I think I don't speak out of turn. The Construction Products White Paper has been published, and a lot of what's in there relies on the duty holder regime that's within the building regulations. So the reform of that system, I think, is linked directly with the building regulatory regime.
We've known for as long as I've been in the industry, that it's a massive task to get Britain's homes up to energy standards, the requirements, not just for fuel poverty, but just so that we are reducing our energy bills. And things like the Warm Homes Plan coming in. But how do you do this at scale and retain quality and compliance?
Well, implied in the consultation, I think, today is the setting up of a Warm Homes Agency, providing end-to-end services to consumers in that system. Is that going to address the challenges that exist at present? That's a question here. A public register of retrofit professionals that would be, if you like, included within those schemes. Delisting and deregistering those professionals who have been found to be delivering non-compliant work or have breached scheme rules. They're taking a systemic approach, I think, within DESNES with regards to the evolution of those schemes that I think will be a step change from where we are today. I think the conversation really is about how that fits into the building regulatory reform agenda. Are there opportunities for alignment? Or is there a scenario where you could have a system that operates alongside this system? And therein lies the challenge. You are talking about the same contractors operating across different settings in that respect. So a bad actor is a bad actor regardless if they're operating in a able to pay market or in a government-enabled scheme.
I think we're recording this in the middle of one of the longest heat waves we've had in the UK, and I think you may get an ironic laugh from some people listening to this. We talk about Warm Homes Plan. Yes. A cool home would be quite nice at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a conversation going on within the building as we speak. Yes.
I think definitely. Intrinsic to this must be ongoing training and professional development, which is something, you got your sitting in guilds in 1976 and never do anything after. The role of CPD in ongoing training, that's presumably going to be a big thing too. I
think it's critical. I think we're moving away from this evergreen approach, David, and I think we're moving towards a system that effectively determines the suitability of qualifications as routes for demonstrating competence, and alongside that, the criteria that must be met for revalidation and reassessment. That's really around the CPD and training you're talking to. I think the challenge in the system today is really around whether or not all of these regimes are aligned. The regulator qualifications framework, the suitability of CPD, given the diverse nature of organizations who offer CPD in the sector. How do you tell the good from the bad? And then obviously the alignment that needs to happen with those competency frameworks. Are these regimes or are these environments all aligned? That's the challenge I think that we're seeing going forward. So it's really ourselves talking to Skills England, DESNES and others, making sure that we're aware of how we are all moving forward in this regard. I think it's a challenge.
So in 5 years' time, when these systems and processes and schemes have had a chance to bed in a bit, how do you see the world? How is it going to operate ideally?
I think in an ideal world, the scenario would be that you wouldn't have consumers exposed to the risk or the level of risk that they are today. The NAO report, all reports that have been published from a consumer perspective by the Competitions and Market Authority, Citizens Advice Bureau and Consumer Scotland, these are all reports that are pretty damning about the consumer experience and about the nature of how competent contractors are who are operating in this space in 5 years' time, we'd hope to have eliminated the risk of those issues reoccurring and hopefully have moved on and set the agenda going forward.
So you're king of the industry for a day. You are the single construction regulator.
Yeah.
Is there one thing you would do that would make the whole process better?
A lot of the time people are talking about procurement, aren't they? The challenges with procurement and the challenges with the procurement process where risk is distributed to the lowest level, the installer. The installer takes on all the risk and the installer is exposed to being challenged in that regard. I think that conversation is a real conversation happening now. And I think is where all the tension and all the issues are today. That is where I see, the subcontracting conversation happening. And hopefully going forward, if that's addressed, then the culture change that's necessary, that sits alongside what the work that we're doing is delivered. The pressure on the culture change element of this conversation is significant.
Mussa Awaleh, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, David.
So thank you for tuning in to Behind the Built Environment. Mussa will also be joining us at BESA's annual conference on the 22nd of October in London, continuing this important conversation alongside a BESA and CPS member, FP Hurley. We'd love to see you there, so don't forget to buy your ticket. If you enjoyed this episode, like, share and subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. And don't forget to leave us a review. It really helps us to reach more people across the industry. And for more in-depth conversation with industry leaders and the latest updates from BESA, stay connected and keep listening until next time. I'm David Frise, and this has been Behind the Built Environment. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to Behind the Built Environment podcast from BESA. If you like what you heard today, then please follow and rate us on your favourite podcast app. Come and join us over on LinkedIn, BESA Group, and carry on the conversation. And if you want to find out more about joining the BESA community, then please visit thebesa.com to start your journey with us today.